Lots of people have gotten back into road trips. Sean Larkin here for Crime and Place. While the fun of traveling is visiting new places, there are areas you might want to avoid. Crime and Place is a unique iPhone app that instantly provides you with personal and property crime rates for any location, current rates based on FBI data. If you're traveling for business or for fun, start a trip to crimeandplace.com for your free download of Crime and Place. Stay aware, stay safe, travel with Crime and Place.
That's a good app.
That is a good app. Yep, lots of people back on the roads coming in the holiday season, especially November, or we got Thanksgiving, Christmas, things like that. People will be on the roads.
Yeah, and you're traveling, you might stop in a town you don't know very well. Heck, you can pull that up, know if this is a good exit to pull off of or the bad exit to pull off of.
Absolutely, and especially if you're out there looking for a new home, new apartment, things like that in town.
Absolutely, they'll help you with that kind of stuff.
So, Howard.
Hey, Sean.
Good to see you again, brother.
It's good to see you. Hey, Sean, we went and saw Kiss last night.
We did. Absolutely amazing show.
Yeah, we were all kind of surprised, weren't we?
Yeah, Jason here was with us as well, and we had a blast. Speaking of a blast, that kind of ties us in a little bit to our guest we have here on today's episode, whatever we want to call it.
Yeah. So we have a guest that's a blast as well. It was a good time, likes to have fun, that kind of blast.
I'm sure he does, but a little bit about his story. The word blast will come into play.
Okay.
Actually, a little bit of a tragic deal. But before we get too far into the story, we have to introduce him. We have Mr. Jeff Postell here, who's now a lieutenant, I believe, with Boston College. Is that correct?
Hey, guys. Good afternoon. And yes, that is correct.
Good afternoon to you, sir.
Man, appreciate
It's more like good evening here or good night because it is 8 o'clock here, so it's a little late.
Yeah, a little late. Well, we appreciate you staying up past your bedtime, and for anybody who's going to be watching this at home, he's rocking a Patriots, got his Pats hat on, true to his roots up there in that Boston area right now. So I know everybody up there is crazy about that stuff.
Yeah,
it's more like adapting to your surroundings for me, but
smart move. It's survival. Survival is what that is.
Survival of the fittest, and it's all about blending in.
Yeah, that's exactly it. I actually was very fortunate several years ago. My brother and I, we flew up there to Boston, and we went to a Patriots Monday night game against the Jets, and they blew the shit out of the Jets. It was pretty impressive many years ago. But, Jeff, you know what we like to do on Coptales and Cocktails, don't you?
Absolutely.
We like to have a drink. We got to have a cocktail. And you are on call, so you are actually...
You can have a cocktail, but you can enjoy through us.
So
I will live vicariously. I'll live vicariously through both of you guys.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we'll let Jason be your surrogate drinker, right? He can sub in for you. How's that sound?
Oh, that's perfect.
All right, we're gonna drink a little Black Maple Hill tonight
because our story kind of gets tied into the hills, to the Appalachian Hills.
Yeah, it does.
That's right.
So Jeff, while Howard's pouring our drinks before we do our toast here, your story kind of goes back a few years to another agency before you ended up there in Boston, correct?
That's correct. Yeah, many years now. It seems like it seems like just yesterday, but really, when you sit back and look, 2000 and started the academy in 2001, right before I was even 21. I couldn't even carry a gun legally as a police officer. So 2001, I entered the academy, and I started on the police force there in 2002. So it's been quite a few years.
So what made you get into policing? We always ask that kind of as our lead in, just to what took you down this path.
I personally have always said that I think it's more of a calling. It's something that I've always wanted to do, very much like a minister or something that people, just, have that drive for it. For me, I think looking back, I think it has to do something with being an advocate and taking care of people and taking care of their problems, being someone who can be a resource to somebody and be a positive role model. I mean, that's really what has really driven my career over the last 20 some plus years is to be that type of professional, because that's what I think when I was a small child, and I think the first word I always joked with my mom and dad, I think the first words out of my mouth were popo, because it was not mommy or daddy or mama, dada, or whatever. It was popo. It had to have been popo, because I don't think I have ever, well, I don't think, I know I've never wanted to do anything other than policing, because I really found it to be something that as a young child I looked up to. And I knew that I could go to these people, the men and women in uniform, if there was a problem. And they were there to be the protectors of others. And that's kind of what drew me into that profession. So it's been a rewarding road ever since.
Absolutely. We'll tell you what, we're going to do our little cheers to you.
Cheers to you, sir.
And we get Jason here.
Get Jason. Over to Jason.
And thank Jason for taking a little drink there for me.
Oh, we're making him do a double tonight.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's doing one for him and one for you.
That's times.
You know, speaking about popo, obviously it's like the street term, guys use for the cops.
Yeah.
When I went through our police academy, we had to wear, it was blue shirt, blue pants. You basically looked like you worked at Jiffy Lube. I mean, that's kind of what our outfit looked like at the
Do you
time.
have the work patches?
Oh, I mean, it's changed now. Now it looks like a full-on police uniform, that these guys have. But back then, you literally looked like you were a mechanic. And on the shoulder, you had a patch that said Tulsa, and it said APO, which was for apprentice police officer. We take a tour of the jail, the old jail, before this new one that we have here in Tulsa was built. But we're walking through there, and they take you through the floor where all the gangsters are, and they're running their mouths, talking shit through the bars. And I remember this one dude, man, this one gangster, he says, "Apo, apo, a popo, you a popo." It was just like, man, dude, we were dying. It was so funny how he kind of put it all together. He sounded it out. Yeah, apo, a popo, you a popo. Yeah, they figured out we were cops, or at least police officers in training. So. So when you get out of the academy out there at the time, was it in North Carolina, I believe, that you went through an academy?
Yep.
Like a state academy that you went through, and then you get to farm out essentially out to to an agency.
So a lot has changed, obviously, in policing, and especially in the certification process, as you well know, in the academy process. It's funny, we didn't have uniforms. Now I think they wear uniforms in my academy back down south. When I went to the academy, we wore polo shirts and khakis. And that was pretty much it.
It's like Howard on a date on Howard on a date. So
hey, I'll take it. That's casual. I like that.
Yeah. With
it's all about comfort. It's all about comfort. But
white New Balance dad shoes.
Don't forget about the tube socks.
Oh geez. All right. That pushes it over the limit a little bit.
Hey, but shit's gonna get done when somebody's wearing no shoes. Your fence will get painted, your yard will get mowed, shit will get done.
That's right.
All right, sorry, go ahead.
No, but I went to the academy. The academy then at the time, and it still is, was ran through the community college, which was about 45 minutes from where I lived. So there was two academies. There actually was the daytime academy, which was a more condensed academy because it was a full-time academy, and I actually went to the nighttime academy, which obviously stretched out for a longer amount of time. So I thought, this is going to be good. I can work during the day, I can drive over, go to school at night. But what I didn't realize is, the longer the course was, you had to remember things from like 6 months before, and it's like,
oh yeah,
well, I'm in trouble. I'm in trouble. So it was a lot of studying. I'll never forget, leading up to the final week when we took our final exams, I can remember very, very clearly lying on the living room floor, and it looked like a war zone with papers and books and notes, and I don't think I ever studied as hard, and probably because I'd never wanted anything more than that. And so it really was like, for me, it was like a life or death situation, because I needed to pass this. This was where I needed to be. This is where I believed I was meant to be. But the academy was ran through a community college, unlike a lot of the state academies here in Massachusetts and other parts of the country. But nonetheless, it's through the North Carolina Justice Academy, and it's a basic law enforcement training, which then leads into a certification process.
So who are your instructors at this academy? Were they other police officers?
Yeah, there was a lot of other police officers, magistrates, other first responders. So it was funny. I just actually was going through some old files earlier this past week and ran across my transcripts and my complete roster of all my instructors, and it was kind of crazy to go back and look at some of the names and remember that a lot of these guys have since retired and maybe even passed on.
Well, you kind of threw out a big fancy word, and I'm from Arkansas, so what's a magistrate? How's that not like a normal police officer?
Well, the magistrate is a judge. That's a judge that It's not like the robe, if you will, but it's a magistrate clerk, magistrate judges who you go in when you arrest somebody, and they'll set the bond on them and release them.
Okay, thanks for that.
There'll be a quiz at the end of this for that one.
Yeah, we should have a quiz, actually. All the things like, Howard and Jason, I mean, they don't have a law enforcement background. So maybe like every once a month, we just drop some sort of a questionnaire or quiz or for the listeners out
Shit,
there.
I know how to spell a popo now.
Popo.
APO.
That's
popo. Apprentice police officer. That's what a popo
Well
stands
done.
for.
Well
So
done.
yeah, you gotta listen when you do these things.
Well
I
done.
understand. Okay, so you never told us exactly what was the agency you were with in North Carolina?
So I started my career with the town of Murphy Police Department, which was a very small town. It wasn't Mayberry size, but it was certainly small. It was about 1,600 to 2,000 population. It was the county seat there in Cherokee County. And at the time, there was about 10 police officers when I first started. So it was a very small community, but it's where I started my career. I actually did not grow up in Murphy. I actually grew up 20 miles away from Murphy in the same county, but from a smaller town called Andrews. And that's who actually had sponsored me to go to the academy. But unfortunately, when I graduated the academy, they didn't have any openings. And so I was fortunate enough to know the assistant chief at the time in Murphy, had grown up knowing him, and they just happened to have a position available. And that's where I landed my career. And I I constantly look back over my career and think about decisions I've made and things that I've experienced. And I can't help but think that was just a really good time working in a small community like that, where you get to know a lot of people. Obviously being from that area, I knew a lot of people, but I didn't know them quite as intimately as I would have if I'd grew up in that community or went to school in that town. So I still had a lot of learning to do, and they had a lot of learning to do with me. But it still was probably one of the best points of my career was working in that small town.
Well, especially as a brand new officer, like you said, at 21 years old or something like that. I mean, you don't have any life experiences at that point. And, it is good to start out in a smaller agency, or even if you're in a bigger department. I mean, you're going to grow up fast as a cop if you're out there in that hustling and bustling area. I mean, you'll learn quick. But no, it's good, I think, for a lot of guys to kind of be in a slower pace, get to know the job, get comfortable being in the uniform, get comfortable talking to people and that type of thing. Question I have for you, man, is, a small agency like that, we were talking 10 officers. Obviously they have a small budget, very small town. Do you guys get all the equipment, that your other agencies get? Like, are you outfitted with a ballistic vest, or is that something you had to supply on your own? I mean, your own gun. I mean, I know there's agencies out there that have to actually provide their own firearm.
You're kidding me.
Dead serious.
Oh, yeah.
Serious.
BYOG.
Yeah, literally. BYOG. Yeah, no joke.
Jesus Christ.
It's funny you bring that up, because when I talk to my officers now in my current role, they have absolutely no clue what it's like. And again, it's kind of that surreal feeling where I just turned 40 this year. Yeah, I know I'm pushing the older mark there. No, I'm kidding. I feel old, but no, I mean, but if I think about the last 20 plus years that I've been doing this, I've seen a lot. And I've also experienced a lot of things that these new younger officers that I think take a lot for granted, because you're right. When I graduated the academy, I had to wait 4 months before I could even be sworn in, because I was not 21. And so I had to wait till I turned 21 in July before I could even raise my hand to swear and uphold the oath. And so when I first started, you had an option. You could either carry an old Smith & Wesson 6906 that looked like a boat anchor, or you could purchase and provide your own firearm as long as you qualified with it. Well, I elected both. I took the department issued weapon, which I don't think it would have probably been like the episode of Andy Griffith when they just fell apart. Or I ended up I bought my own weapon. So I first started out, I carried a Glock. So I supplied my own weapon. Ballistic vests, absolutely. I didn't get fitted for a ballistic vest probably until, I don't know, maybe 3 or 4 years, 5 years in the job. I had an old military vest. It did not match my uniform. It was brown, and we wore Smurf blue at the time. So it didn't match. I mean, but that's what you kind of get at. Our police vehicles at the time. Now let me back up. A lot has changed from when I first started till now. Even in Murphy, they've come a long way. And I've had the opportunity. I was the assistant chief of police in Murphy before I moved to Massachusetts. So I had climbed through the ranks in that department very fast and very quickly. So I'm hoping that a lot of the things that they have now is part of the reason of what I was able to do in my time there, and also successions. The chief that's still there, that when I was the assistant, is still there. The gentleman that succeeded me is a phenomenal police officer and a great assistant chief, and they have brought that department much further than where it is when I was there, and specifically when I first started. I mean, we were driving police cars that were retired highway patrol vehicles. We didn't have MDTs in the car at the time.
What's that?
We had mobile data terminal, a computer. So we had certain equipment that was decent. We had radars and PBTs and things like that. But a lot of the things that we carried, a lot of the officers supplied on their own, including even their uniforms in some cases.
Well, let me ask you this: Murphy not being a big town, I'm sure that they tell me about what it was like to be on patrol in a little bitty town like Mayberry. What did you see? What did you get called out for? What's it like working in the smaller communities? I mean, we've had police officers on here before who much smaller department than Murphy's, and they end up with a lot of problems that big cities have.
Oh, there's definitely big city problems in rural areas, especially in areas where you see an increase in drugs and narcotics, especially methamphetamine, or the hillbilly heroin, as they call it. But we saw a lot of those things. Very, very much to what Sean mentioned a minute ago, that we kind of forget, or we get not I don't want to say complacent. That's one thing. Well, we can talk about in a minute. But you become you become a little bit more. I'm trying to find the word here, where you take things for granted. There was many times I was the only police officer on duty, and you have to learn very quickly how to de-escalate situations very quickly, because my nearest backup could have been 20 minutes to 40 minutes away. Yeah. And in a situation where you pull over a vehicle, and many times this happened, you pull over a vehicle and something goes wrong, the life or death situation becomes even more significant, because you don't have the luxury of a city or even a mid-sized town or city department that you have a backup unit there in less than 2 minutes or 5 minutes, or you're even perhaps riding a 2-man car. We didn't have those luxuries, not all the time. There were certain nights where we had more than one officer on duty, because we could kind of sense, or we had trends of what our busy times of the week would be, or the days would be. So we were staffed up. But many times I was the only officer on duty, so you had to really rely on talking to people and learning how to talk to people, and being able to de-escalate situations.
And so when you're saying, backup, I'm assuming it's probably from another agency. I mean,
absolutely,
if you're the only one on duty, it's going to be probably a deputy, from the county, or, a highway patrolman or something else. That would be it.
Yep. Yeah, we had to rely on a lot back then, and they still do. I mean, the department has grown since I have left, and again, their equipment has improved. I actually just was in North Carolina back in July for a news report on the Rudolph case, obviously, which is probably where we're going to lead up to here in a little bit. And I stopped by the department and spoke with the chief and the assistant chief and some of the officers that I knew, and I certainly see a lot of change in that community, but also in that department, and it's good change, because you see the professionalism and the progression, and I think you need that. But for a small town, I mean, we dealt with everything else. I mean, we had the run-of-the-mill stuff, domestic violence. I worked. I think when I was there as the assistant chief of police, we had our first murder, if you can imagine. I mean, and that's something that I'm happy to say. We didn't have murders every day, but I worked one murder when I was there. A lot of unattended deaths, overdose, drugs, narcotics, drunk driving, traffic-related incidences and issues, larcenies, break-ins, the same things. But it's certainly a busy area, especially when you look at the staffing ratio compared to the call volume. It's definitely a busy place.
Sure. Well, that kind of leads us into, just you working alone. It's kind of the big incident that, I mean, you talk about people that start their career off with a bang.
All right, boom.
I mean, you literally you did. So you've got less than a year on the job, 10 months or so, if I believe. You're the rookie, the 21-year-old kid on duty with your brown vest you picked up somewhere else, and your gun you bought yourself, and you're out working what I'm guessing the overnight shift.
Yeah, I was assigned to the overnights.
So you're out on patrol that night, and just kind of
Take it from there.
take it from there. I mean, kind of roll into that.
Well, it's funny. All these things that we talked about kind of lead up to where it is. I mean, working for a small department, not having the luxuries or the resources a lot of other big departments have, relying on your training, relying on your ability to communicate and talk with people, remembering what your principles are, what your purpose is, being prepared. And also when you talk about the resources of the department, I mean, that was one of the nights where after 2 o'clock it was a Saturday morning, or it was going into Friday into Saturday. I was the only officer on after 2 a.m. We had staffing. Can you imagine 3 officers up until about till 11, and then it went down to 2, and then at 2 it went down to 1 with me. And just a few weeks prior to that, the chief of police at the time, he will tell you this story as well, if anyone ever asks. I went into his office. I said, "Hey, chief, you've got to get me off night shift. This shift is killing me. I don't like it. Nothing ever happens. I'm bored." And then, a couple of weeks later, if this happened, and I think they quickly removed me off a night shift. I can remember that very quickly. But that night was no different than any other Friday or Saturday night, where we dealt with a lot of traffic related incidences we had back in the day, where people would cruise the main strip, and it brought in a lot of people, a lot of cars, a lot of drama from time to time. And so we were dealing with the traditional things that we had, I don't say routine in this line of work, because nothing is ever routine, and I think this proves to be nothing is ever routine, but just the normal activities. And about 2 o'clock in the morning, when one of my partners logged off duty, he was still in the station doing some paperwork, finalizing some reports. And we had a policy. We tried to stay downtown during the 8 o'clock to 2 o'clock in the morning time frame, just to deal with that. And then after 2, we would venture off into other parts of the town, make patrols, check on businesses, doing all the the overnight stuff. And no different, I pulled into the shopping center there on the east side of town. And one of the things that my field training officer, who I really, really always talk about, because I think the way I was trained on the job, in correlation with the way I was trained in the academy, certainly put me in a better position, and in a more well-prepared position. And my field training officer was a retired highway patrolman from Florida. And now he's actually the academy director where I went to the academy at now, and is still, giving that same type of training to new officers. So I know they're coming out with a lot of the same traits that I have. And I've always stood by the way he trained me. And one of the things he always told me was, he always quoted Louis Pasteur, "Chance favors the prepared mind." And he always talked to me about being putting myself in a better position, being prepared for whatever I come across, always having the upper hand, always being in a better advantage point, and always being tactically and strategic in my approaches to things. And so that night, much like I had done for the last 10 months, I had changed my patrol patterns, because I knew in my academy and in training, and then just in general common sense, that people watch the police. And if you become involved or in tune to a routine, you're going to become complacent, and people will know your next move. So I always changed up my patrol pattern. Some nights I would check the businesses, sometimes I wouldn't. Sometimes I go in a different direction. Just happened this night, I came into the parking lot of the shopping center and turned my lights off. Every light I had on the vehicle, I turned off, and I shot through the corner of the parking lot and to go in behind the businesses. And as I came around the corner of the business, I hit my right alley light, which is a light on the light bar that shines off and illuminates the right side of your vehicle. And as I came around the corner of the building, I saw an individual kind of crouched down in the roadway, as if they were kind of sneaking, or if you will, going towards the rear of the business. 2:30, 3 o'clock, 3:30 in the morning, there's not a lot going on in those businesses. And I always said there's only 2 types of people out at that time, especially behind the business: cops and crooks.
Yep.
And I knew I was the only cop on duty at that time, so I knew that he wasn't a friend. So I initially, when I saw him because of the poor lighting conditions, I thought I had an individual that was carrying a firearm, because he had something that was wrapped around his upper torso. It looked a lot like a long gun. So I startled him, and he ran towards the back of the grocery store there onto the loading dock and concealed himself behind a stack of milk crates. Well, I thought I had a potential individual breaking into something. So I radioed off that I had a man at gunpoint, give my location, and then I exited my vehicle and took cover behind my cruiser door, and began giving him commands to come out. And long story short, he came out. I began approaching, secured him in handcuffs, and by that time I had backup units arriving, both Murphy Police, Cherokee County Sheriff's Office, as well as the Tennessee Valley Authority Police arrived. Long story short, that individual ended up being Eric Robert Rudolph, and was one of the was the top 10 FBI most wanted, and had been on the run for 5 years. And that, luckily and fortunately ended one of the longest manhunts in U.S. history.
So can you give us a little backstory on Rudolph? What his crimes were, what he did? I mean, there's been not everyone knows about this story, and it's a pretty interesting story.
Yeah, I mean, it's a real interesting story when you get into the weeds of it, if you will. So Rudolph was charged and later convicted, for being responsible for the 1996 Atlanta Olympic Park bombings, which killed 2 people and injured 120 some odd others. He was then responsible for a series of other bombings in the Atlanta metro area, which also targeted abortion clinics, which also had a secondary device which targeted first responders responding to the scene. He targeted a gay lesbian nightclub in Atlanta. And then he was later responsible for the Birmingham, Alabama abortion clinic bombing that ultimately killed a police officer in Birmingham. And that was the incident that really kind of put Rudolph in the sights of the Federal Bureau of Investigation and law enforcement as the prime suspect, because of the eyewitness or the keen observation of a college student that saw that was in the area when the bombing happened, but then saw an individual walking away from the bombing when others were going towards the bombings or towards the scene. And he thought that was very weird, and followed the individual and actually lost him a couple times, but was able to run into him again, at which time he was able to get a plate number off the vehicle, which then, obviously came back to Eric Rudolph.
Wow.
More than wow. So you're telling me you're a rookie cop and you get to bust somebody who's on the FBI top 10 list, right?
Well, that is correct. Yes. But I would say it was being in the right place at the right time. A lot of people, a lot of critics will say it was luck. And I always argue back and say, we only need luck when you go to the casino, or you're playing the lottery. I call it being in the right place at the right time, working through an investigation, not leaving anything unturned, and just being out there doing the job that I was hired to do. I mean, I was famously quoted for that. I really don't deserve credit. I was doing the job in which I was hired to do. Right. And I've stood by that.
Yeah, and I guess to tell a sort of similar story, back when I was in training, I had this old school training officer by the name of Dale White. At the time, he had 25, 28 years on, 30 years on or something, just an old school guy. And we trained from 6:30 in the evening till 2:30 in the morning. And we were a few weeks in. This was my 3rd phase. And so our training is 16 weeks of field training. So we were in our 3rd phase. By now I've kind of, figured things out, how to be a cop, how to patrol. And one night it was slow. And he had said, he's like, on nights when it's slow like this, roll through your businesses, take a look at your pawn shops, people that are scoping around there. And we're literally driving down the street as he's telling me this. So we pull into this strip center on South Mingo here, and we had a pawn shop that I think it's called Guns something. They were well known for guns. And there is a small SUV driving through the parking lot with no lights on. And we drive literally right up by it, and I hit my spotlight right into it. And it's some youngsters, some kids. And as soon as I hit the spotlight, boom, they take off. And we end up in a pursuit. The vehicle's stolen. I will say this: I was a very fast runner back when I was younger as a cop.
You're not anymore.
No, this kid when they crashed and bailed out the pursuit, and I'm definitely not anymore. This kid smoked me.
Really?
Oh, I mean, he left me behind. We found out he was actually the running back for Union High School at the time, which at the time was one of the top programs in the country for high school football. He got kicked off the team when he got caught. But anyways, these guys had a stolen car, and one of them admitted what they were going to do was drive it through the front of the pawn shop and try to steal a bunch of guns. And so officers in this career, there are guys on every department. Doesn't matter if it's a small department with 10 people like Murphy, or if it's a very, a medium-sized agency like with Tulsa with 800, or a very large agency. There are some officers that continuously get into stuff, get into chases, make a lot of arrests, but it's because they're out there doing their job. They're out there looking for. They're being cops, exactly. I've said it before. A former chief here, he said, "We are the police, not report takers."
Right.
That's not your job to just take the calls and take reports and write a report. You're supposed to be a policeman. Be out there. Be visible. Be active. Interrupt bad guys' lives. That's what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to keep them on their toes. So I agree with you.
Two points on that is I always tell my guys, take it the extra step. We have a detective bureau. Detectives can get the call. They can get the cases, the reports, and they can follow through with it. But take it an extra step. Do it. And that's one thing working in a small department, because I didn't have the luxury again of having a detective unit. You were the detective.
Right.
So you had to learn a lot, and you prosecute a lot of your cases. One of the other things is when you talk about getting out there, being visible, trying to disrupt things, a lot of not a lot of talk about this. So there's been some discussion, and I don't mind giving a little tidbit here on it. But Rudolph had cased that area for months and months, and actually told investigators that he had pretty much logged down the patrols of the Murphy police in that area, because he was going down and foraging and dumpster diving for food, so he could live off of it. And so he had tracked it down, but he told investigators that for the last year or so, he had not been able to nail down those patrol times because they had altered so drastically. Well, the only thing that had happened within that past year was that I had came on board and I was on duty. And I had actually ran up on him almost one other time prior to that night. And that could have ended differently, because the night that happened, I drove right past him. He was hidden in the bushes, in the weeds, over the embankment, and he was carrying a weapon that night. So I was very fortunate in that case, but I had almost caught him before.
Yeah, I had read that he had said that, outside or besides you guys on patrol there in, the Murphy Police Department, but he was paying attention to restaurants, to when they would throw food out, what nights they were able to throw, or their vegetable deliveries and things like that were showing up, so that he could, just as you said, forage and kind of, scavenger for food. He actually ended up having like 55-gallon drums supposedly buried out somewhere, that he was storing food and grain and all this type of stuff. I mean, he was a bona fide, survivalist, I guess. I mean, he lived out in to an extent for 5 years or something like that, right?
Yeah, it was 5 years. I think that's debatable. I really do. I mean, there's no doubt that he was prepared and knew what. I mean, this was not something he just woke up one morning and said, "Hey, I'm going to go do this." There was preparation. There was a lot of preparation for this. There was a lot of things that was boiling up to that point that kind of put him to that edge, if you will, or put him over the edge. But you don't go out and do that sort of stuff if you haven't had months, if not years, of preparation. And to get 55-gallon drums and garbage cans hoisted up in a tree with grain and all that, and have a couple different campsites overnight, that's something that doesn't happen overnight. That's a lot of work, a lot of preparation, and very difficult for one person. I don't care how big of a survivalist you are. I don't pretend to be a survivalist, but I have enough common sense to know that's a tough undertaking.
Yeah.
And also living in the mountains of Western North Carolina for 5 years with no social interaction, with no connection, if you will, to the outside. I am not saying that it's impossible, but it's near impossible in my mind, especially in the element, because that's very, very tough terrain. There's a lot of animals. There's a lot of, very, very serious rough terrain there, and also very, very different four seasons. You get some significant cold weather, some significant heat. And so I think it was very challenging. So I've always been of the mindset that he might have been on the run for some time, but I don't think that he was on it the entire 5 years. I just have a hard time
Putting it together.
arguing that. And you know what? And only he knows the truth.
Well, let me ask you this question. You pick him up. Does he identify himself immediately? You take him to jail? How's that shake out?
So that's a really really interesting part of this case. Is he initially gave me a false name. He initially said that he was hitchhiking from Ohio to North Carolina when I caught him, and that he was homeless. He presented himself as someone who probably looked like they had been out in the element for some time. He had a little bit of a stubble growth, very, very shortcut, buzz cut hair. Didn't look like he'd been on the run for 5 years, but certainly he had some miles on his sneakers. I remember his sneakers were very worn. So he kind of gave the illusion that he had been on his feet for some time, and just his overall appearance would have warranted somebody to believe that he might have been homeless. He said that he had hitchhiked there from Ohio. So when he gave the name and date of birth, I ran it through the NCIC. I ran it through our databases, and nothing came back. So I said, something's not right here. An individual hitchhiking from Ohio to Murphy, North Carolina, with no form of identification, no hits, no nothing. I found that to be a little bit of a red flag, if you will. So we asked some other questions. Well, what's your social security number? Well, I don't have one. Well, you don't have one? Well, no, I haven't had a need for it in some time. Okay, well, that's a second red flag. So I hauled him in to the detention center on safekeeping because he couldn't provide food, shelter, or clothing. And we wanted to figure out who this individual was. And it was there that we discovered who he was. On the scene, there was a sheriff's deputy that had arrived that actually knew Eric Rudolph from school back in the day. And came up and hit him with the flashlight and pulled me off to the side. So, he really has an uncanny resemblance of Eric Rudolph. I'm a 21-year-old rookie police officer. I'm like, are you sure? There's no way there's no way, how is this even possible? But because of the field interview investigations on scene and the questions and the answers he was giving, there was something there that wasn't registering in my mind. So I wanted to look into it a little bit more. So I got him to the jail, went in and pulled up the FBI wanted poster on the computer and began looking at the description of Eric Rudolph and checking off like, all right, height. Okay. All right. Maybe so. Eye color, hair color. And then I got down to noticeable scars, marks, or tattoos. And on Eric Rudolph's FBI wanted poster, it indicated he had a noticeable scar on his chin. And I can remember when I was looking that up, I was looking off to my right while he was sitting in the holding area, and I could see him. And when I got down to that point, I looked across, and he had his hands behind his back because he was still handcuffed, and he was looking up at the ceiling, and staring at me was the scar on his chin. And that's when I got a little bit more confidence that we might have something here. So we printed out the FBI wanted poster. We went in behind him, and we're kind of comparing the pictures to the individual there sitting in front of us. And finally, one of the TVA police officer, Jody Bandy, asked him, says, "Tell us who you are." And he says, "Well, what does the paper say?" And so we responded, said, "Listen, that's not what we asked. Tell us who you really are." And it was then that he kind of paused for a moment, and he said, "I'm Eric Robert Rudolph, and you've got me." And that was when, I'm not gonna lie, my knees knocked so hard I about answered them. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. I mean, this was serious. I mean, it didn't take me long to realize this was going to be big. So I immediately backed out of the room and went back into the holding area, not the holding area, but the sheriff's office. And I got on the phone with dispatch. I said, "Listen, you need to call the chief of police. He needs to get down here immediately. We have Eric Rudolph." And I hung up. I began sitting down. And I began compiling my notes because I knew this was going to amount to something. And so I started writing everything down that had happened. And then the second call I made was to my mom. And I'd let her know that I was going to be late and not coming home at 7 o'clock, and I know she pressed me for answers at the time, and I would not budge. And all I told her before I hung up was, just turn the news on and you'll see. And that was it. The rest was
Hope you
the
told
rest
her
is the
you were
blur.
okay. Hope you told her you're okay. That's
Well,
those calls in the
absolutely,
middle of the night scare mom to death. So you got to say, "Hey, mom, I'm okay." Turn
yeah,
the
no,
news
I
on.
let her know that, and I told her, listen, don't be expecting me home anytime soon. But that was the call. Those were the calls I made.
Man, so after that happened, obviously it's a national story. This guy's been on the run. I mean, the Olympic bombing, the other 3 bombings, and so forth. As a 21-year-old kid, a new cop at the time, I mean, every news agency I imagine is trying to get a hold of you. People magazine kind of list you, in there and so forth. What was that like, just going from this small town new cop to all of a sudden this national spotlight?
I tell you, it certainly had an impact on me, and it's still a lasting impact. People say 15 minutes of fame. I say 15 plus, because, and I didn't go out looking for fame. I didn't join the police department to be famous. I joined the police department to make a difference. And one of the things that I was taught was to always be humble, and to never forget where you come from. And that's something my mom and dad bestowed in me, was always remember that. And I think that's one of the things that I always try to be, is I always try to be humble about this whole case. I don't talk about this case. I mean, a lot of people that know me have no clue about this. And that's even after all these series, Netflix series, movies, documentaries, magazines, newspapers, news articles. I just don't talk about it unless I'm directly asked. I don't just offer it up, because that's not who I am. That arrest obviously is something that I carry and will carry in my professional career and in my life. But it's not who makes me the person that I am. It does not make me the police officer that I am today. It has certainly provided me with experiences and opportunities, and also some heartache over the years, because I always tried to give credit where credit's due. I didn't ever, again, it was not some spectacular crime fighting. It was just being out there, being in the right place, doing what you're supposed to be doing. Call it stumbling up on you, I might get a little offended. Call it lucky, I might get a little offended. I call it doing my job.
Yeah, sure.
And that's what it comes down to, and not forgetting what my purpose was. And so there was a lot that came with that. There was a lot of animosity. I mean, I dealt with a lot of animosity from my peers,
Yeah,
because I was taken off the road. I was taken off the road for a period of time because of the news articles. Funny story. A lot of people don't know this. I don't tell a lot. But since I'm amongst good company here, my family immediately following that rumored to have received death threats. I had death threats. Nothing obviously factored out, but I had, here I am, a 21-year-old police officer. I mean, I carry a firearm, and I carry weapons for a living. I protect, people, and I go out and do the job. But here I am, and my mom for a couple of days had a security detail with me everywhere I went. And I'll never forget, my poor mother was a ball of fire, and anyone that knew her knew that she was a spitfire, and she was tougher than nails. And I'll never forget, she come into the police department one day. I had been taken off the road. I was taking calls, I was doing interviews, and I hated that because I wanted to be on the road. And she slung the door open, come into the police department wanting to see the chief of police. I'm thinking, what the hell is going on with my mom?
That's the last
She comes in, and here comes the FBI agents right behind her. And she says, I want them away from me. She says, they're driving me nuts. I can handle myself. I don't need protection. I can protect myself. And here she is, a 60, 70-year-old woman. And she probably could have, but I was just making that point because it impacted our family. It impacted, everything about us. But we never changed, and we never let it change us. But I certainly have had a lot of great experiences, a lot of great opportunities, met a lot of great people.
Well, Jeff, we've got about 3 minutes left, so you got to tell us what you're doing now.
Trying to survive.
All right, well, good. All right.
No, I mean, now I've moved on. I had a great opportunity in North Carolina, really give me a good baseline and a good foundation. Being the assistant chief there in Murphy was a great honor for me. And then obviously moved to Massachusetts. I had family up in Massachusetts and fell in love with the area up here. Really enjoy it. Landed a really good position with the Boston College Police Department. A little bit different going from municipal over to campus policing, but I was able to adapt pretty good and pretty well because of the small town, policing experience I have. And I've climbed through the ranks there, and now I'm the patrol lieutenant in charge of operations. So I have 30 to 40 police officers that report to me and a number of support staff and civilian staff. So I'm not anywhere near done, but with my career, and I enjoy this career today still just as much as I did when I first started.
And you're still young. You got a lot ahead of you. And you're also, from my understanding, ran for like city council out there, right?
Yeah, that was something. A complete outsider. 5 years ago, I decided that I wanted to do something to help others even more in my community that I live in now, partly because of my mom. My mom has since passed. And I wanted to be an advocate for our seniors and for our elderly people that struggled, that could not get the support and the resources that they needed when others are. And so I ran for public office, and not again being a complete outsider in a very heavily populated field, I topped the ticket, came in first place, ran for re-election 2 years later, won again, and now I'm up for my second re-election now in November. So it's different coming from the town of Murphy to a city in Taunton, where we have 60,000 population. It's a big difference, and I think again, when you have the trust of the people to go in there and make the decisions for them and represent them, and they have the faith and trust in you, I think that says a lot about you.
Absolutely. Well, Jeff, man, we literally have just a few seconds left here. Man, big thank you for taking the time to be on here. Just a quick update. Rudolph was convicted, pled guilty, life without parole in prison, where he will stay.
Like a supermax.
Yeah, he's in a supermax. He'll stay there forever. So this episode is obviously not about him. It's about Mr. Postell and his career as a police officer. So, man, we really do appreciate you being on here with us.
Cheers to you, sir.
No, I appreciate the opportunity, gentlemen. Thank you very much, and stay safe.